Okay, everyone, we're going to begin the meeting. So I will start with roll call, right? So Kay Young.
Here.
Erin Joyce.
Thank you, I'm here.
Julia Flaherty.
Here.
Peter Herbst. Here. Shelley North.
Here.
David Cunningham. Liz Page.
Here.
Joe Reynolds. Not here. Raina Rubin. Here. Great. Thank you. And does someone have to make a motion to open the meeting? No.
You just start.
I did not get Justine. I was going to introduce Justine. I don't know if I was supposed to add her to roll call or not on this specific one. Okay. So I'd like to start by introducing Justine Wong. She's the newest member to our Master Plan Steering Committee. Justine is the mother of 4 children and the wife of Wes. She's been raising her family in Braintree, I don't know, since they were 20 years. And Justine actually owns a few different properties in town. She has a successful career in corporate America. She works for New Balance. She's worked for Bank of America, Biogen. So everyone, please, she's a wealth of knowledge, and welcome, Justine.
Thank you.
Great. I may have skipped the member and staff announcements.
That's okay. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, just getting caught up on what had gone on. Just one announcement from the staff. We will be at Braintree Day, which is Saturday. We will have a table there. We'll also have a handout for residents that includes the Phase 2 schedule as well as a QR code with a survey that they can take on the spot. The mayor's authorized me to get some gift cards for prizes. So anybody that completes the survey will get entered into a drawing to win a gift card to a local Braintree establishment. We'll have the Braintree board there so people can put the sticker, and we're going to try to take some of the larger boards that we had from the forum and condense those onto a single sheet just to have some information to kind of just give residents an idea of what the good work that we're doing here and encourage them to attend our meetings and participate. Thank you.
Okay. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Jen, who is going to do a presentation on Phase 1.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Jen Goldson, planning consultant, as you know, and I'm really excited. This is the end of Phase 1, where we spent time trying to understand the community, and we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. But at this point in the process, what we like to do is bring in our full consultant team to present the areas that they focused on, and I think it's probably worthwhile just to do a new round of introductions. It's been a little while since you've all seen everybody here. Of course, you know me and Delaney Almond, and then maybe Eric, Chris, and Juliet, if you could just come up and introduce yourselves quickly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Halverson. I'm a vice president with RKG Associates, and we're working on the team to cover the economic development and the public facilities and services chapters.
Hello, I'm Chris Hurlick. I'm a senior planner at RKG Associates, working with Eric on economic development and facilities planning.
Great.
Good evening, I'm Juliet Walker, and I'm with Kittleson & Associates. I'm principal planner there, so I'll be working on the transportation chapter.
All right, and I just realized that we're having trouble with ClickShare right now for some reason. Is there something I need to do on my end here? Okay, all right. Well, while we're waiting for that to go on, the only thing you're missing is that the list of the names you just heard introductions for was on the screen. and it said which elements, we were responsible for. And of course, even though we are introducing ourselves as responsible for specific elements, we really do work very collaboratively. I don't know how many of you follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn, but you may have seen we posted a video of our little brainstorm meeting where we all came together to talk about what we're learning about Braintree. And so even though should I just press this? Okay. Even though we're saying, we're focused on the housing section and the cultural and resources section and historic preservation and land use and sustainability is what Delaney and I focused on, and RKG focused on economic and public facilities, and Juliet on transportation. We really do work very collaboratively. So where we are in this process, there are 4 phases, as you may remember. And in the first phase, we're just trying to understand where Braintree's come from and where you are right now. And that was really the purpose of this existing conditions report that we gave you. And I'll talk a lot more about that in a moment. But I want you to know we're at the end of this phase. We like to ask the town council and the planning board to also participate and hear the presentation and get a chance to really ask questions. Of course, they can come to any meeting, any of these meetings, but we like to really encourage it at the end of each phase when we're presenting our findings from that phase, because it really sets the stage for what we do next. And it's a really important milestone. And so what we're going to do next, and we have a whole, at the end of our presentation on existing conditions, Delaney will talk about phase 2 and launching phase 2. And this is really the phase where we start a much broader and deeper community engagement effort. And we have a lot of different tools we want to share with you tonight about how that's going to go. And the next phase, this Braintree Tomorrow phase, is really about, well, what do you want to see in the future? We understand where you are now and where you've come from, but what do you want to see in the future? And it's really the visioning phase. And we'll talk quite a bit more about that, but just to give you a sense of where we are in the process. And then after that, next winter, really, we'll focus on, well, how do you get to that vision? What kind of policies, what kind of strategies do you want to recommend? Any questions on where we are in terms of right now? Okay. All right, so I did want to go through a little bit of master plan fundamentals, not as much as I've gone over in the past with you, but just to get us at the same, starting point. I know probably new folks chime in when these are being aired on TV, and maybe other folks are in the audience or new committee members. So I always like to bring us a little bit up to speed. So bear with me, as some of it will be repeat from what you've heard. So the core questions at the heart of any master plan effort are summed up in what's on the screen here. How can you strategically shape change? You're changing. We're going to talk about changes you've seen over the past decade and past couple decades, really. And how can you shape that change going forward, or how can you harness that change? How can you capitalize on opportunities? Do you want to capitalize on opportunities that you may have? And also, how can you preserve your assets? And then ultimately, it's about that balance. How do you balance those changes with preservation? And that's really at the heart of everything we'll be doing with you, is trying to help you figure that out. The other piece that you'll start to figure out as you go through this is, who even are you? Knowing that your demographics are changing and characteristics of the town are changing, who are you and how are you changing? But what does that mean? What is your identity? And how can you identify yourself in a way that feels very authentic through this master planning process? Is this making sense so far? Okay. Yes. And then the last is, you have assets, and in our presentation we'll talk about quite a few of them. How can you leverage them to achieve your goals? Once you figure out where you're trying to go, how do you leverage those assets? So that's what we're trying to do. These are big questions, and they're not going to be answered in phase 1. So any questions so far? Okay. All right. And so you may remember there are these 8 elements. And so this first report that we gave you is organized into these 8 elements. Land use, transportation, economic development, housing, open space and recreation and natural resources, historic and cultural resources, public facilities and services, and then sustainability and resilience is not a traditional master planning element, but many communities, of course, want this element, including Braintree. And so, but what I want to just remind you is, even though we're starting out with each report, the report you saw had a chapter on each of these. These are really all interconnected. And so the work products you're going to start to see emerge in the next phases are going to start to look at themes and the interconnections even more than they do right now. All right. And so what is the purpose of this phase that we're coming to closure on? So this phase 1 is really establishing the tree trunk. It's trying to understand what will hold up that vision of yours. We don't know what your vision is yet, but we just want to understand the facts, and we want to understand the trends. And so you'll hear quite a bit of data tonight. We try not to make it too data heavy, even though the report itself is quite data heavy. It's really a baseline report that collects from various sources that I'll talk about in a moment and tries to give you an understanding of where you are right now. It includes physical, environmental, cultural, and demographic characteristics. And what we try to do as consultants is point out what do we think are issues and what do we think are opportunities. Now, I want to have a word on that in this next slide here, because what I want to make sure you understand is that this document is not meant to read as recommendations. Perhaps some of the language we use came across as a recommendation, and we certainly didn't mean it that way. So we're happy to go back and revise things that seem like, oh, are they saying we have to do X, Y, and Z? We're certainly not. All we're doing is trying to point out opportunities that we see based on the information. And we'll talk about that tonight. When we talk about each chapter tonight, we're going to point out what are opportunities and issues that we think you should be aware of. And in the next few phases, we want to try to work with you to figure out, should these opportunities and issues be addressed in some way, and if so, how? But that's really up to you all. All we can do is point out what we're seeing and give you ideas for best practices and techniques that have worked in other communities. Does that make sense so far? Okay.
Yes.
All right, great. And so in the next phase, we're really going to start to ask the community even more, what is your vision for the future of this community, and how do you want to attain that vision? So the other intention tonight, our team is going to provide, well, there's 3 intentions. Sorry, I'm not reading my own slides. There's 3 intentions tonight. So one, we're going to provide a general overview, but we're not going to go into every single detail. As you know, we gave you an almost 200-page report. So we're going to really touch just the surface. We're going to talk about what is the data telling us, what are these data telling us about Braintree today, and how it's changed. I think sometimes people don't realize how and that their community is changing. And so when we look at the demographics and other characteristics, we can see some of the changes that we want to highlight for you. And then we'll talk about what issues and opportunities we see. The second intention is to really share with you the next steps in this process. We've built in a review process that we're hoping will give you enough time to digest this large report. We're asking for your comments back by July 11th. We wanted to get you through the 4th of July holiday and give you a little more time and really thoughtfully digest this. We didn't want to give you this week. We gave it to you a week ago, and we don't expect that you've read every word and had a chance to really digest it and internalize it and give us your comments. So July 11th is this first round, this internal review, and then Delaney will talk a little bit more, or maybe I'll do it, I can't remember. Someone at the end of the presentation will talk a little bit more about, well, when does the public when is this like a broader review of the existing conditions? And so it's a 2-step review, and the first step is with town managers, as well as the master plan committee members, town council, planning board. We want to make sure that it's accurate first, and then we'll release it for public It's certainly a public document right now, because we gave it to you, but we want to really solicit broader public feedback after we've incorporated your suggestions and any other suggestions we receive by July 11th. Does that make sense in terms of this just in general? Okay, great. And then the third intention for tonight is we would really love to hear your questions, even if you haven't digested the full report yet. Any observations you have about the baseline report? Did anything surprise you? And I mean that, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Or it could be the second bullet. Is there anything you actually question? You're like, that surprises me, and I actually don't believe it because of what I'm seeing on the ground. Can you verify this, or can you can you look more into this because it doesn't seem right to me? The third thing is, did anything confirm what you already knew or suspected? And I'm thinking some of it must have, as you're reading through, like, oh, I figured that's what was happening, or, I kind of knew that this is the trend going on right now. And then the last one is, are there any other suggestions you have for either data sources? We've tried to look at as much local data sources as we can, but maybe there are other things that we're not aware of that you can help us so that we can draw more into the next version of the report. Does that make sense in terms of what we're trying to do tonight? Okay. All right, and so how did we even write this? What is it based on? And so you know that we went through first a round of focus groups that were focused on these various topics, and you helped us come up with this list of various members of the community and town officials who have some level of expertise or knowledge about those areas. So that's one of the first thing we did. Alongside that, we also did a series of interviews, including RKG, and their team interviewed all of your department managers to really get an understanding of what's going on. We had the May Community Forum, which was very well attended. You guys did a really excellent job of outreach, and we brought some quotes in from that. We're processing through, and we'll provide you a full summary, but tonight we've given you some quotes, things we've heard, and integrated that already into the report as well. And then we looked at a lot of local data reports and studies that the town managers the department managers really gave us a huge data dump when we first started. And so we should count up how many, but we have many, many reports and files and local data that we looked at. We also brought in census data, federal census data, both from the American Community Survey, which are estimates, and the full 2020 census data and 2010, just to compare a bit with those different benchmarks. And then we looked at a whole variety of state data sources. And if you look at the report, you'll see that there are a ton of footnotes, and at the end of each chapter we list data sources as well, if you're curious where the data came from. All right. So now let's get into some of the overall report findings. So you know that there are these multiple chapters, one for each of the statutory topic areas, including one for sustainability and resilience. The introduction, though, can serve as an executive summary. We tried to make that capture the high-level findings so that if you do, want to point, if someone sees it's a 200-page document and they just want to get the gist of it, that's a good place to start. And then people can always skim forward to the chapters that they're the most interested in. We've also formatted in a way that is hopefully makes it easier to skim, with pulling out some of key findings and sort of using our formatting to help people skim through. Does that make sense so far? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so who lives here and how is Braintree changing? I'm going to try to get that little dialogue. There we go. So the population is growing and becoming more diverse are two of the key findings. And you can see on this chart, hopefully folks in the way back can see this all right. But this is just comparing you to some surrounding communities. And so Braintree is this darker brown line. This is your population change since 1930. So we went back almost 100 years now. And you can see that you had some growth in the early part of the century and a little bit of a dip in the 80s. And then you kind of started to very gradually grow again. And you're just a little bit higher population than you were at your highest point in the 80s. So not dramatic growth. If you look at some of the other communities around you, some of them are smaller and larger, but you can see some similarity in those curves. Quincy, of course, is nothing like Braintree, as many people have pointed out, and you can see that from this chart as well. You can see how large the population is. It doesn't even fit with all of these other communities down on the bottom. The other thing is that your population, I said, is becoming more diverse. You've grown from about, 15% of non-white, we call it BIPOC population, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and you've actually doubled in that population. So you're about 30% right now. And that was from 2010 to 2020, so just in the past 10 years, your BIPOC population has actually doubled. We also see from the estimates that about 10% of your population speaks Mandarin or Cantonese. So you have a pretty large non-English, or at least English as a second language, population. And so that may also lead you to think about, well, how are we engaging and doing outreach? The median household income for Braintree residents is actually lower than in the whole Boston metro area when we look at that geography. But the other thing I want you to know is that the growth has been much slower. So in the past 20 years, Braintree's median income, household income, has grown about 7%, and this is adjusted for 2020 numbers. And the region has grown by about 13%. The Braintree median household income is 101, just over 101,500. And the area, the Boston metro area, is actually has a median household income of about 113,300. So I don't know if that surprises anyone, but we always like to compare, well, how has income been changing, and how is that comparing to the whole region? And then the other, one of the key takeaways is about your demographics is most of your households are actually quite small. There are, I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it's something like 53% or 54% of all of your households have one person living alone or two people living together. And so that will become significant when we look at your housing stock and how that there's actually a mismatch there. Anything surprising so far? Okay. All right. In land use, we looked at a whole bunch of things, including how much of your land is actually developed. And so developed uses, and by that I mean any kind of use that has a building or other kind of man-made feature, like a parking lot on it. Developed uses make up about 55.3% of Braintree. I'm sorry, that was in 1980. I'm not reading my own slide properly. And in the 42 years since, you've increased only by 3%. Of developable area. And I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just saying you've increased 3% since that time. And over 22% of your total land area is actually protected open space. And then if you look, there's lots and lots of details I'm not going over, but one of the things we brought in was this chart that just shows the percentage of land use, by type. So residential single family makes up about 29%. And we also have the acres of how much residential single-family acres uses in your land. And then you can see the various commercial, industrial, open space, and other, like streets and right-of-ways. And so we think this stuff is interesting. I don't know if everyone does, but we thought we'd bring this chart in. One thing you can see is that about, if you look at industrial, about 4.8% of your land. I'm sorry, I'm not reading that. That's institutional. Industrial is 3.7% of your total land area. And then commercial is 8.2%, not including the mixed use, which is 0.3%. So we can get into lots of the details, but I just wanted to let you know that that's in there. All right. So I'm going to get a little bit into housing first. And so we brought some quotes in from community forum participants. And so this is one about needing affordability for both the young and the old, for first-time home buyers as well as those looking to downsize. And we heard a number of comments along those lines. So we tried to just bring in some examples of some of the themes of comments that we were hearing at the May Public Forum. And so you might wonder, well, what do we mean by affordable? So here's a chart that just shows you, I said before that the median household income in Braintree is $101,500, about $101,500. Well, what could that household afford to buy? Under a number of assumptions. We looked at your tax rate. We assumed a 30-year fixed mortgage. We looked at the current interest rates when we ran this, and of course those change pretty quickly. But what we saw was that if you're living in Braintree and making the median household income, you could afford to buy a home of about $405,000 $300. But when you look at the home prices, it's quite a bit more. The median sales price in 2020 was $615,000. And we just pulled 2020 to compare apples to apples a little bit because that's the income that we were tying it to. And so in order to afford that price home, under all those other assumptions that are in the small footnotes there, you would need to have an income of about $154,000, just over $154,000. And when I use the term to afford, we're assuming that you're not going to spend more than 30% of your gross income toward housing cost. And when housing planners and affordable housing planners say, is this affordable, they don't always mean, is it counting toward your 40B 10%? What they really mean is it affordable to that household? Is that household spending more or less than that 30% of their income? So just so you know some of the assumptions that are kind of wrapped up in this kind of calculation. All right, so big picture takeaways, and then we're going to move on. So for housing, what kind of housing needs are indicated by these data and trends? One, the population grew faster than housing units, which puts pressure on housing prices and rents. So if people are, and that's not just Braintree, there's a lot of pressure on housing because there hasn't been enough housing production just in general in this region, in this state, and beyond. Most homes in Braintree are on the larger side, between 3 and 4 bedrooms, whereas most households are on the smaller side, between 1 and 2 people. And so there's a mismatch. Now, some people might say, well, maybe a one-person household wants to live in a 4-bedroom unit, and that's true. But 4-bedroom units tend to be more expensive than a studio or a 1-bedroom. And so if someone is not able to afford a larger unit, even if they want it, they may be priced out because of that mismatch in the housing stock. The other finding here is that older adults are projected to increase, and younger adults, and by that I mean 20 to 34-year-olds, are projected to decrease, just based on the current trends. Will this manifest? Maybe, but maybe not in exactly the way the predictions are. And so what do these 3 big picture takeaways mean for the next phases of the master plan? I think it leads us to some questions that we'll put back, not tonight, but in the next phase, really put back to you all and to the larger community. Do you want to encourage more affordable homes given those trends? And if so, what kinds of options might be helpful to Braintree residents? Do you want to encourage smaller homes? And if so, what kind of choices might help the older residents, which are growing, and also help younger residents move to Braintree or stay in Braintree, or perhaps they grew up in Braintree and want to stay here. Perhaps they're people who are working in Braintree or wanting to work in Braintree. What kind of options can help them? The last is, do you want to encourage older adults to stay in Braintree as they age? And are there pockets of the community that you think would be appropriate for other housing options like condominiums or supportive housing or other options? And so we're not here to tell you what to do. We're really here to point out these opportunities and give you information, best practices, and ideas to think about on how, if you do want to encourage any of these things, well, how do you do that? And we're not here tonight to do that, but I just want you to know that's where this kind of analysis is leading to those questions that we'll put back to you all in the community. Is this making sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. And so the next piece is Chris Herlick is going to present on the economic development findings, and this is just, while he's coming on up, this is just one of the quotes that we heard from a community forum participant, and there were a number of quotes like this. I'd love to see Braintree promote local restaurants and local businesses over chains, and that's just an example to get us thinking about economic development a little bit. Okay, Chris.
Hello, everyone. Some of you may have been in the public forum, so this might be a little bit of repeat spiel for you. But when we talk about economic development at RKG, while we are talking about jobs and we are talking about real estate and the physical changes that happen in a community, we also think more holistically about how we can improve quality of life for our residents. And that's really the outcome that we're looking for with economic development. So in this section, we also had some big picture takeaways. We noticed that Braintree is in great position to take advantage of some regional trends, while at the same time also supporting strong local businesses and small businesses within the town. As Jen alluded to, the immigrant population and the BIPOC population in Braintree has grown significantly, and those are two groups that actually tend to be more entrepreneurial and start more businesses than white and native-born populations. So that could present an opportunity in that category. But that, of course, also inspires some questions. And alluding to the quote from the previous slide, we want to think about how we support new businesses, and if we want to support new businesses, and what kinds of business formation we'd really like to see here in Braintree. And then, of course, what kinds of spaces would those properties need? What kinds of properties are appropriate for them? And as I mentioned before, if you have people with a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, there might be ways that you can help them achieve some of their dreams and their goals from a business perspective. We also noticed that employment has actually shrunk in Braintree over the past decade. It's shrunk by a little over a percentage point. At the same time, there are some key sectors that have grown in spite of the overall shrinkage. And we're thinking specifically about transportation and warehousing, seen some growth. Real estate and leasing has seen some growth, and also although overall professional, scientific, and technical services has shrunk, there are some subsectors within that, including the life sciences industry, that have seen some quite notable growth. But this leads, of course, to the question of how much you want to diversify your economic base, and how much you want more jobs and what kinds of jobs. There are definitely industries here like retail and food and accommodations that have large employment but got hit pretty hard by the pandemic. So how can we think about either helping those industries or maybe diversifying so that the next shock isn't quite so harsh? We also noticed in our study that there are development opportunities throughout town, and the nature of development in those places will probably have to be different than it has in the past. Greenfield development is likely not an option in many instances, and so there are going to be other forms that this will need to take. So we need to think about where large-scale development is going to be appropriate versus where smaller-scale interventions might be. So as I mentioned, there's really a diverse population here. It's growing, albeit slowly, but it is growing again after a long time. And this presents opportunity for new business, not just because of the diverse population, but more population means more customers who need more goods and more services. There's also a significant influx during the daytime, a lot of people coming to Braintree for work. That could present an opportunity for businesses that are here. It also, as Juliet may tell you in a few minutes, can complicate things from a transportation standpoint if you have a lot of people commuting in from out of town. But at the same time, one of the reasons people commute in from out of town are the amazing regional transportation connections that Braintree has. And these are an incredible opportunity that the town can capitalize on in attracting new businesses. As I mentioned before, new projects here are probably going to look a little bit different than they have historically throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even into the early 2000s. So we're going to think about which modes are maybe most desirable and where they'll fit in best.
Awesome. So next we're going to talk about historic and cultural resources. So again, this is just a quote that we pulled from the community forum participants that kind of just sets the tone to start talking about historic and cultural resources. So someone noted that there's an opportunity to use historic resources for cultural events, art exhibits, and theater, kind of bringing that history and culture together. So we have some of those big picture takeaways and how they relate to the master plan for this section as well. One of the main things that we learned and that we heard through our process is that Braintree has 780 historic resource properties that are inventoried. But what we've heard is that there are many more resources that have not been inventoried. So this has implications about planning for historic preservation. If you don't know what you have, how can you plan to use it or preserve it or rehabilitate it? So it leads to these questions of, do you want to encourage greater protection of historic resources? And do you want to expand the public awareness and documentation of these resources so that you can plan and shed more light on these historic and cultural resources that you have in town? Next, we heard that cultural resources, including public art, festivals, art and theater classes, cultural organizations like the Curtain Call Theater and the Beanstalk Music Festival, are seen to enrich Braintree. People love these events, and we heard that through our focus groups and the forum. Just every time we've talked with the public, we hear that these things are well loved, and the Braintree Day coming up. So these leads to questions of, do you want more events like this? Do you want more public art? Do you want to focus on public placemaking, cultural activities, and other social infrastructure improvements? And finally, the demographic makeup of the town is experiencing major changes, as has been stated a few times, and has greater diversity from people of various cultures. So that leads us to question, do you want to explore ways to increase outreach and engagement opportunities for these diverse populations, including residents who don't speak English as a first language? So yeah. Oh. Sorry, we have two computers up here. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so next we'll talk about open space, natural resources, and recreation. So we have a couple quotes here. First, there's a need to keep parks, green spaces, ponds, waterways, and wooded areas clean. One thing that we heard a lot at the forum and in our focus groups is that there's a need for more maintenance in the parks, that people feel like there's litter and just could be kept up a little bit better. So this is just one quote from many that mentioned that. And we also heard that we need better playgrounds for our children and more open spaces. People just want opportunities to play outside. So looking at these big picture takeaways and the relation to the master plan, as Jen said before, about 22% of Braintree is protected open space, and you have about 45% tree canopy coverage. So do you want to work towards expanding open space to slow the increase of impervious surfaces and minimize the loss of tree canopy? And this, increasing tree canopy, we heard that a lot, again, through all of our public engagement processes. People love your trees and want to see more of them, and increasing tree canopy can help with things like the urban heat island effect, where if you have a lot of impervious hard concrete surfaces, it tends to be hotter there. So increasing tree canopy can help to make your town more comfortable, and they look beautiful as well. Next, the open space and recreation plan calls for improvements to existing parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields. So do you want to see more resources for improvements and maintenance of these parks and recreation resources? And that includes accessibility improvements. From the forum, we heard a lot of people mentioning, making some of the paths and hiking and walking areas in Braintree ADA accessible, and just making everything more accessible to people who have mobility impairments and such. We also have learned that there's limited access to the Montezquat River, and many points along the river are dominated by commercial uses. So there are a few plans to expand the river access through trails, but that is, an untapped resource that is something unique and beautiful in Braintree. So we ask you, do you want to explore additional river trails, water access, trail connections, all of these things that relate to that untapped resource? Okay, and next we have a few quotes, and then I can ask Juliet to come up and talk about transportation. Do you want?
Okay, so the first quote from the community forum was about traffic congestion from the high school, particularly in the afternoons, creating issues for all roads in proximity. I guess there are two. And then the other quote is that streets are too busy to walk. I would love to feel more comfortable walking to the store. Oh, and there's another one, wow. And I want to see more bike infrastructure, public transportation, and more trees. So as we're talking and thinking about transportation, we're thinking not only about sort of what we talked about in terms of the assets, what are your strengths? We're also thinking about what does that translate into in terms of challenges? You have some great strengths in terms of transportation in Braintree. What are some of the concerns or issues about transportation that you also want to address? And we also look at human behavior and how that influences how your transportation network functions. And human behavior is influenced largely by how they function in their lives, where they go to work, where they go to school, how they get access to different services. So one key takeaway or one key fact to summarize or to point out is that most people who work in Braintree live outside of Braintree, so that you have people commuting in for work. And the trend is that most people who live in Braintree tend to work outside of Braintree. Now, that we did have that little thing called COVID in between, and we're still trying to understand what the long-term trend will be related to where people are working who live in Braintree. I'm probably assuming right now there's probably still a number of people who are working from home, but we're seeing transportation networks go back to functioning similar to how they were functioning before, so we will see some of that return very likely to pre-COVID trends. Now, that influences a variety of things. It influences how your networks function, your transportation networks function. But it also has implications, for example, for affordability for people. So right now in Braintree, 15% of Braintree households are heavily burdened by housing and transportation costs. So Jen talked a little bit about affordability for housing, where you're looking at approximately a third of your income. If you're spending more than that on housing, it tends to be quote unquote unaffordable. If you add on top of that transportation, the threshold is usually about 45%. If you're spending more than 40% on housing and transportation, that tends to be unaffordable. So you do have, on average, about 48%. Braintree households are spending about 48% of their income on housing and transportation. And part of the reason is likely because a good portion of people are driving to get to their work in particular. So that's just sort of putting all those different factors together. We also are considering how like I said, how your transportation network is functioning, and a key component of that is safety. So we look at crashes. That's one way to judge safety. We also can judge safety in other ways, but the preponderance of different types of crashes on your roadways. Typically, you have a little bit of a higher rate of crashes. We're separating out fatal crashes, but non-fatal crashes than the rest of your region. And that could be a variety of factors that drive that. One is, just congestion on roadways. Another is just sort of how your roadways are designed, and if you have different intersecting, larger collector roads coming onto local roads, sometimes you have safety concerns in that case. But thinking about how you might want to improve, basically you want to ultimately not have crashes on your roadways, right? So thinking about what you can do in your master plan to think about how do we improve safety. And typically improving safety on your roadways, if you improve it for all users, then you're going to improve it, you're going to get rid of these road network issues, particularly for traffic crashes. So some of the challenges and opportunities that we talked about in the master plan relate to the things I just talked about. Traffic flow and traffic congestion, there's a lot of, you want to balance that with how you're impacting your neighborhoods or your community character. So if you have a lot of, or you have areas where there's some traffic congestion, thinking about how to, like I mentioned, make your roads safer, but also think about how you can, by doing that, you can also maybe improve the community character and the neighborhoods through which those transportation networks go. Already the town has made some important improvements in that area over the past few years. Simple things like working on improving your traffic signals. So I know there's been some improvements in some of the intersections just because there were updates to the traffic signals. But again, balancing how traffic flow and managing traffic flow, but also making sure that you're also addressing characteristics of your town that you want to retain. So it's not just a cut-through community. The other area that you might want to consider is how new development that's coming in or desired to come in, how that can align with your community goals. How can private development enhance transportation networks? How can you partner with future developers to really improve those networks? And that's safety, but that's also expanding your bicycle and pedestrian networks, connecting to transit. Those are all things that you can talk about with new development. And if you lay out those goals in advance, it's an opportunity to really, for those developers to understand what your goals are overall. And then thinking about continuing to provide safe and convenient choices as alternatives to getting around by car. And as I mentioned, if you're making improvements to the roadway network that address all users, you typically will improve the safety of that network for all users as well. So if you're thinking about designing your roads to accommodate bicycles and pedestrians, you're likely going to see a decrease in traffic crashes because you're improving the overall safety of that road comprehensively.
It's me. Hi, everyone. So before I get started, I just want to tell you, if you're going to read the Public Facilities and Services chapter, just caffeinate and read it. It's detailed and it's a little lengthy, but it's one of my favorites only because if you don't utilize all the services in the community, you may not know that they actually exist, or if you haven't been to some of the buildings that the town owns and operates and maintains, you may actually not know that, particularly as a new resident, versus someone who's been here for a while and may have taken advantage of all the services. So I really like the chapter, hopefully you will too, but I'll run through this quickly. So one of the quotes from the forum was around just improving and modernizing the schools and investing in the facilities themselves, but also making sure that the staff is there and continues to be there to educate our students. One thing that I heard in the department head interviews that I conducted was there's a real feeling of pride around Braintree schools, and people take a lot of pride in that. And one of the questions that I always ask in these is the community willing to invest? Is there ever any pushback in sort of investing in the schools? Because that's often a good indicator for a community, and here the answer seemed to be no. So I think this statement is good from the participant side. Whoops. So I tried to take the chapter and boil it down into three kind of what I thought were the key points. There's obviously a lot more detail in the chapter about these, but the first is, and one thing that stood out to me was just sort of the age of the publicly owned buildings, those facilities. They are pretty old, and as I did and conducted the department head interviews, this was something that sort of reiterated to me. I know recently with the two middle school projects one's completed, one is ongoing, with the fire headquarters project that's coming up. That's another one. So there is investment in the buildings, or at least in some of them. But overall, there are a lot of them that are older. They do require continued maintenance from the facilities staff as part of DPW. And eventually, I think there needs to be sort of a plan for modernization of facilities. This clearly can't happen tomorrow, but just sort of something to be thinking about, particularly with the master plan, because we want to understand, is there a priority for actually improving those facilities? Is there an order in which the town wants to undertake them? Does the town even want to undertake that? And maybe if the facility needs to be relocated for one reason or another, is there a more appropriate location or a less appropriate location? And then how do you plan for those costs appropriately over time? The second was around staffing and just ensuring that departments have enough staff to continue the excellent services that residents, businesses, and visitors to the town get today. What I understood with COVID, there was a hiring freeze, and so some vacant positions weren't filled in certain departments, and then if there was any attrition in a department, then it sounds like some of those weren't filled as well. So just as we sort of hopefully come out of COVID here over the next few years and start to think about not only our facilities, but the folks who staff those facilities and provide the services, are departments adequately staffed going forward? Particularly if there is a choice through this master planning process about sort of growth and preservation and how the balance of that might happen in the future over the next 10 or 20 years, making sure that not only the facilities are appropriate, but the staffing capacity is there. And then just the last one, which I know has been mentioned a few times, and I'll mention it again, is just around the demographics, but sort of coming at it from a different angle with services. Do the services actually support, say, our older adult population and our seniors that we know, at least over the last few years, has been growing and probably will continue to grow in the future? And then as the town has continued to diversify, as I think Jen mentioned early on, from a race and ethnicity standpoint, especially for folks whose maybe English is not their first language, do we have translated materials? Are we communicating with people, in the language that they understand? And so I think that just opens the door to be more inclusive, and it also allows those residents to maybe feel more comfortable taking advantage of the great services that the town already offers and sort of doing that in a more inclusive way. So I have just a couple of quick highlighted bullet points here to talk about each of those. So just in terms of the facilities, the town does own and maintain, almost 1 million square feet of public facilities between town-owned and the school facilities. Most of that is in the schools, over 700,000 square feet across the 10 public school buildings. As I mentioned, the sort of average year of construction, when you sort of average the year built, is about 1947. Of course, some facilities are much older, like the one that we're in today, and some are much newer, like the library or some of the school facilities. And as I mentioned before, when I talked to the department heads, a couple stood out as having a desire for more modernized facilities. Police and DPW, I think, were the two big ones. But also we heard from Elder Affairs. Prior to COVID, the visitation to that building and also those who were taking advantage of the services and programs and the transportation services that Elder Affairs offers, that was growing year over year. Of course, with COVID, that has scaled back. But as the population continues to age, hopefully and age in place, I imagine that hopefully at some point that will sort of come back around again. And the school buildings are older, and what I heard from the superintendent is that some, particularly high school, may be oversized for current enrollment or even enrollment projections. So is there a way to sort of think about what do we do with those buildings over time? Do we replace the sort of existing neighborhood schools that are there? Do we stick with the number of schools we have? Do we consolidate elementary schools and site them in a more centralized location? Of course, none of these are recommendations, but just things that I think are kind of out there and may sort of bubble up during the master plan process. Just around staffing, as you can see, up through 2020, staffing had been sort of steadily increasing to keep pace with the number of services and sort of the growth in the town's population. But calls to police and fire also steadily rose year over year prior to COVID. In most of the communities that we're working in, COVID did kind of reduce calls, but we expect that will come back. As I mentioned, visitation is down, but prior to COVID, it was growing year over year. School enrollment prior to COVID was growing year over year. With COVID, I understand that school enrollment's down about 200 or so students. Some of that students shifting to private school or leaving the community at whole or doing homeschooling. The superintendent mentioned maybe over the next 4 or 5 years sort of seeing that number coming back as COVID hopefully continues to wane. And DPW continues to assume more responsibilities. In almost every community I've worked in, DPW just has a lot that they're responsible for, so just sort of keeping that in mind as we're thinking about the plan. And that's it, I think, for that.
Awesome. So I'll finish up this part of the presentation by talking about sustainability and resilience. So one quote that we heard from the forum is that there's an opportunity to increase alternative sources of electricity by BELD to reduce energy costs to residents. Just kind of setting the tone for what we're going to talk about with sustainability. Another quote is that I hope that this plan will improve schools, create affordable housing, and add diversity to the town. And this really gets into some of the multiple aspects of sustainability that I'll talk about in a second. Right here. So a lot of times when people think about sustainability, you think about just the environment and how you can improve environmental sustainability. But what you'll notice when you get into the sustainability chapter of this report is that we do focus on the environmental aspects, but we also talk about the economy and social equity, talking about human capital and what the labor force is like in the economic development section, but also thinking about it from a sustainability lens, thinking about your population and diversity and how you can be more equitable in your populations, talking about that in housing and the demographics chapter. But really, You'll notice in the chapter that we talk about all three of these elements of sustainability, not just the environment, although that is an important aspect of it. So just some initiatives and plans that Braintree currently has. Braintree was designated as a green community in last year. There's a new water treatment facility that's in progress. You have a complete streets policy, and then some plans that you have are a climate vulnerability assessment and action plan, an energy reduction plan, and hazard mitigation plan. Now, most of these are focused on that environmental aspect of sustainability, but we do have to look to the other chapters of the master plan to kind of see, what's going on for the economic and the social aspects of sustainability in Braintree. Thinking about different considerations, Braintree is already experiencing effects from higher temperatures, sea level rise, and increased flooding. This is a picture from Watson Park in 2018, and there's a plan in place to kind of address that, but you are experiencing these effects of climate change on a local level. We also want to talk about equity, that social equity part of sustainability. So one thing that we looked at in our analysis was environmental justice populations. Now, what is an environmental justice population? These are neighborhoods who have been called out at the state level because they have either a median household income that is equal to or less than 65% of the statewide median, so they qualify based on low income, or 25% or more of its population is Black, Indigenous, people of color. They lack an English language proficiency, or its childhood cancer, lead poisoning, or asthma rates are statistically significantly higher than the statewide average. So you can be classified as an EJ population based on any of those factors. And you can see that in Braintree, on this legend, you have some neighborhoods that qualify as an EJ population because of income, minority, or both minority and income population. And we looked at this compared to a bunch of different layers and indicators of sustainability and public health. So we found that environmental justice populations in Braintree are concentrated in this northern portion of the town. They're located near the Braintree Electric Light Department, some gas leaks from the utilities, and major highways where there's a lot of traffic. And being near all of these sources of pollution is not great for your health, and it just goes to point out that these populations that are low income and minority are closer to these sources of pollution, greenhouse gas emitters, and that it's negatively impacting them more than other members of your community. So one thing that knowing all of this, we asked some questions. How can the strategic conservation of open space create buffer zones to protect these populations? And that would also provide recreation opportunities, and it could help reduce the urban heat island effect, which also, I don't think the map is in this presentation, but urban heat islands are found in the northern portion of Braintree as well, so it's warmer on average in these areas. Okay, and that is all that we have for going over those key points. And before we open it up for questions, I just want to reiterate that you have a few weeks to review this report and give us your detailed comments. So we want your comments on July 11th, and then we'll have another meeting on July 28th where we will discuss your comments and the revisions that we'll make. And then by August 11th, we'll submit a revised report to post and seek broader public feedback. Jen mentioned some of this already, the second round of comments, and those comments will be due in October. So we have a lot of time to make this accurate. As Jen said, our highest priority in this process is making sure that this is accurate so that we have the right understanding of everything that we're talking about here so that we can accurately move forward into the next phases where we start planning. So I think we can open it up for questions, and we can start with, did anything surprise you from what we presented?
Why don't we start with the committee, and then we can go to the public. Would that be, do you want to begin, Joe?
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you. That was a very comprehensive view, somewhat surprising, but on the other hand, really not surprising, having been someone involved with the town since the 90s, particularly in zoning. There's some real telling data here, and I'm very surprised about the median income. I'm very surprised about the equity and the ability of Braintree residents or people to buy homes here in Braintree compared to what the prices are. One of the things that I'm curious about is if there was we talked a lot about the aging population, aging in place here in Braintree. The amount of housing inventory certainly stretches across, I should say the lack of housing inventory stretches across the entire community, stretches across demographics. And in particular concern that I have is the aging in place, the folks who have been in this town for years, who don't want to leave the town, but perhaps don't want to maintain a single-family home anymore, but want to stay in the community. And the options that are available for them to stay in the community. We've talked about 55 and older housing, but there's another piece that I wonder about if that came on your radar, and that being the folks who need assisted living. You know, there seems to be three phases of an older person's life and their lifestyle and their needs. So from my view, I don't see really any inventory available for that demographic. There was also some considerations that you had, some data that you touched on about the ability of folks who grew up in this community being priced out of the community. And some of the numbers here that you cited, in particular, development uses over the last 40 years, how minuscule it has been. The housing stock, the mismatch of the housing stock. And to me, it tells a very clear story, is that it hasn't been a priority of this community. For what reasons, I could probably cite a few, but that would take some time. But it's the facts and data are really speaking very clearly here to the type of problem that we have. I firmly believe that housing is one of the legs of a three-legged stool that makes a community vibrant, that makes a community able to, it brings a quality of life, to raise the quality of life, maintain the quality of life. It costs money. And money seems to be a big issue that's touched upon in these results. Our inability to raise revenues as a community really has affected our schools, physical plants, lack of investment. I'm not talking the last 10 years, last 20 years. I mean, you cited 40 years. I would agree with that, absolutely. But it is what it is. But here we are. It's our problem. And certainly the folks who are here this evening and who are on this board, they think seriously enough about it to put the stake in the ground and do something. And I think this is an excellent report as far as the data that has been accumulated. I know it's just a start. One of the other things, our comparison to the greater Boston area, Braintree is a great town, but I'm surprised at where we stack up. Where do we stack up? Transportation has always been a big issue in this community. I know the comment about it's a cut-through community. Yeah, I agree with that. But we in this community as well have homes that have 3, 4, 5 cars, all right? And they really do a number. You mentioned about schools. It's impossible to get around this town when the elementary schools and the middle schools are letting out, and the high schools. A lot of times you see long lines of cars with just one person in it. And that's an issue, I think, that should be explored. You know, I understand safety, parents, their concerns for their kids, absolutely, that is a priority, but there's got to be a better way for us to be able to function as a community when it comes to transportation. One area I didn't hear you touch on when it came to traffic, and I'm curious if it was something that came up at all, traffic enforcement. We talked about the number of crashes in this community. I think that has a lot to do with speeding through. We're a cut-through community in that sense. I hear a lot of folks talking about their neighborhoods are being used now as cut-through streets, and I see it every single day. Cars speeding down straightaways on streets that are residential neighborhoods, and it's very dangerous. So to me, again, that's a money issue. That's another money issue. We can't afford to have a traffic enforcement division in our police department. The ability to use the assets that we have, transportation, public transportation. Now, there's a dependency on the state, there's that as well. It hasn't been the most reliable public transportation over the last 10 years. So that is a very difficult thing that we need to partner. But we are part of the greater Boston community, greater Boston region, and the entire region seems to have the tide rising, and Braintree's isn't. And so there seems to be a disconnect there, and I really want to get to the bottom of that, to be able to articulate it in such a manner that we understand the cause and effect of why Braintree seems to be lagging behind our sister communities. Housing is a very big part of that. That's one of the legs. Housing, zoning, which I'm interested also if you're going to touch on any kind of zoning, and our tax policies. And right now, we have a very, very good tax rate for our residential homeowners. This lack of economic development, which very interesting facts out. I would encourage everyone in this room to go and look at the Department of Revenue's Department of Local Services and see what the benchmarks are for the town of Braintree compared to to every community in the state. Braintree has a very low economic growth rate over the last 10 years. And here we are, we're having problems with money. We can't build our schools now, and this is when we need the money. So we really do need to think more smartly, and this is going to be an excellent tool, I think, to give clarity, to be able to build a roadmap, to be able to build benchmarks, which I think is extremely important as one of the outputs of this program, is that benchmarks, you know, many years in project management and leading initiatives, you always have to have your benchmarks. How are we doing? So I'd be very interested to see how we could do that. And so I'll limit my comments to that to allow the other folks to have a word. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else on the committee that would like to say something?
Hi. I just wanted to say excellent presentation, very comprehensive. Similar to what Joe had said, I think equal parts surprise, and I figured some of the stuff, but especially the housing, and I think on most points that you touched on, we all think we know what's going on or think we have our finger on the pulse, whether we're on this committee or just as a resident. And then when you see the actual facts that don't lie about how much of the community is made up percentage-wise, the affordability, sustainability, I think is alarming, but in a positive way that kind of redirects our focus on what's important. But I think another takeaway from this is how absolutely vital public input is, so that it's extremely comprehensive, so that we can ensure that we're doing a good job for the town, but also it's vital to succeed, that community involvement, as well as the facts based on census, et cetera. But excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to? Justine?
But they can hear me. I'm, in a way, agree with Joe's question about the benchmark. It was, you guys have done a lot of good research, but for me, it was only Braintree. I have not seen some benchmark informations that I hope to see. So example, in the household income perspective, when you make comparisons, who are the residents? This is where I do not see, if we overall you're talking about the median incomes, but are they a renter or are they the household who owns the house perspective? That's where I wanted to more detailed local perspective and the benchmark compared to other towns. What are the density compared to our neighboring town? A town that close enough with the percentage of housing we have, which is I did not see in here. And I guess the next one was when you were talking about our visions, when we're talking about housing development, affordability, who are we trying to attract? Who we have in current resident is where, from the age perspective, from education perspective, you probably see a lot sensor data, and I do, as a programmer, I read through the sensor data, but I did not see any more detail in terms of what Braintree really are. Other than, as you say, one of the Massachusetts was a misleading sensor information. If you're looking at the survey perspective, the new sensor, Massachusetts is one of the states had a misleading sensor information. So I wanted to see more benchmark in terms of the sensor versus what's actually happened in Braintree. As a resident for 20 years, I see it different. Example will be from the affordable housing perspective. Are we low income? We have bigger house. Is it because people cannot afford to buy? If we build it, is it only for the local people who can afford to buy? Are people prefer to rent? If we're building a more housing, is people prefer to just come in, as you say, be another bypass for a different generation, a younger generation? If we're building a more, apartment complex or townhouse complex, so is who do we want it to stay? Do we want to be a bypass community? That's where I don't see the benchmark that's showing. And also, when you come to the transportation perspective, we talk about 15% of Braintree. How's that being calculated is not, I'm not seeing the data on the transportation, on the, you were talking about the 15% Braintree house transportation has like more car versus it. This is where, when Joe was talking about after school was the nightmare. Is it this what our residents choose to live? That's why we pick up our kids? Or because we did not have enough public transportation? That's the question that would need to be answered from the benchmark perspective. What our residents really want to have. For me, as a mom of 4, I send my kids to public transportation. We have enough bus for the kids, but the parents choose to pick up the kids because we don't have daycare. We don't have after school that we can send our kids to. So if you're looking at the census data, public data, that does not reflect what our resident is really are, from my perspective as a 20 years residence in town. And when you talk about crash accidents in towns, this is often, I have questioned, I got frustrated why the lights did not turn, living in and next to mall, the 5 corner, nothing we can do about it. This is my question is, I have not seen data to support, say, how much can Braintree do? Every time I complain about our road, we were being told that it's state-owned. What are our options? This is what I do not see the data that we can support. Say we have the crash, but because we have how much percentage of the road belongs to the state that we are not controlled by, that type of information I have not able to see from the report. Maybe I need to go into the detail. I love the way you summarize up everything about Braintree, And I hope that our residents, our towns, can see those data versus just within this group that who come in. Because a lot of data, I don't think our residents know who we are. They just enjoy the community, but they do not have those type of detailed information. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it was very approachable, very well organized. I will say I found the presentation tonight a lot more accessible and interesting and organized than the report itself. I do read a lot of these reports professionally and write them myself professionally, and I guess moving forward as just kind of like the task to get this over the finish line, we have a draft before us and we're giving feedback, the group is giving feedback, but I guess the consultant team working also refining the report and going through it, or are you waiting for our feedback? A lot of my kind of commentary as I started kind of digging into it, and I spent a lot of time and didn't get really far, but it was more like a professional styling of the report, and I was like, well, maybe they're still working on it and they really want to get this out to us. So what sort of feedback are you looking at getting from us as we review this? You know, what should we be doing and concentrating on to help you? And then also, are you guys working also kind of just doing that sort of editing furthermore?
So carefully, by the way. So what we're hoping for is when you give us your comments, we really want to make sure it's accurate. That's our number one. We want to make sure it's accurate, and that if you see other, if you know of other reports or studies that maybe you don't think we referenced or should be, things like that are the kinds of comments we want. If you disagree with some of our conclusions of opportunities, that's fair game too. Of course, this is not a policy document, but we want to make sure that we're being fair in our analysis. In terms of the formatting, this will always be a standalone document. It is not the master plan. When we do the master plan, which we'll be, starting to work on really, this lays the groundwork for it. I'm not saying it's not important, but what I'm saying is this report, because it is so detailed and so data heavy, most of the public won't be too interested in really reading it word for word. And so we try to take some of the key takeaways into that first chapter, which serves as an executive summary. Now you could go through, and some of your comments may be, well, why didn't you bring this other finding up into the intro? And that's fair too, because we made some judgments about, well, what should we bring into the intro and what aren't we bringing up into the intro? And so comments like that are important. In terms of the overall formatting, this will not be an InDesign kind of document that's, very graphic heavy and really meant to be broadly digested by the broad public. The master plan itself, though, will be, and I'm happy at our next meeting to kind of show you some examples of what is coming down the pike. What we do eventually, when we get to sharing a master plan layout with you, we bring in those existing conditions, like the main high-level findings that still have some teeth after we go through this whole process of visioning and things. We asked a lot of questions like, this baseline document has basically led to a bunch of questions for you about what are the things you really care about, what are the things you want to try to seize opportunities or overcome issues. And some of those may fall away because they may not end up being important in the master plan. And so once we understand through the visioning and goals phase and then the strategies phase what's really important, we just bring the findings in that essentially support your vision. And so if we say there's an opportunity for X, Y, and Z, and the community ends up telling us over the next year, well, that's not important to us. We don't, these opportunities are not important to us. We end up not bringing those into that plan. So I wouldn't spend time on, formatting and things like how can we make this design different. What we really want to make sure is that it's accurate and that the conclusions seem reasonable. Some of the conclusions are on issues and opportunities. That's what I would spend time on. And then this document will always be, part of the public record, and it will go along a companion document to the ultimate master plan, but this is nothing what the master plan will look like.
Kind of just the follow-up question I had was what role this specific report plays. So it sounds like maybe the executive summary aspect becomes maybe a part of the master plan. So maybe if this group focuses heavily on the highlights that we want to make sure are incorporated in that executive summary as like good feedback.
I think that's important. Yeah, a lot of that executive summary will make its way into the master plan in one way or another. The other thing that's important are the things that we highlight throughout, because you'll see those on boards, and we'll create like a handout for your tabling activities that gives some of the highlights. Some of that will be drawn from that executive summary. Other boards, we may pull out some of the quotes. They're not really quotes, they're just emphasis texts. We sometimes pull those out as key pieces of data to share with the broader community. So we want to make sure those are really accurate. And if there's any question about that, that's why we're also circulating this to department managers to make sure that they all read their sections, the sections that they're most knowledgeable about.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Does anyone? Okay. Julia. Oh, Julia.
So you asked what we were surprised to hear about, and there were, 3 basic things that I will comment on tonight. It was a wonderful presentation, really enlightening. It wasn't all surprising, but it was wonderful to see things demonstrated through data that seemed true, but you never know if they are until you see it borne out in the facts. I was struck to learn the extent to which people drive into Braintree to work here, but the people who live here don't do that. They leave Braintree to go work. I think that must have to do with the service industry, workers in Braintree who can't afford the housing that we have here in Braintree. And it's important to think about that as we consider what we're going to do about our traffic, because everybody wants to make the traffic better. Everybody does. And it's important that we do so. And that seems like a factor that I haven't heard discussed as part of that equation often enough. The second is that I did not recognize the extent to which Braintree is aging. And I think it's really important for us to consider that as we determine, as a municipality, how are we going to serve those who are aging? It gives us a reason to focus and maybe reprioritize as we plan. Because I didn't really recognize that. And the third thing is that employment has shrunk. That's sort of concerning to me, and I will ask some questions about why and how you got that data for some other time, but I was struck. So those are my 3.
Thank you. David? Oh, I didn't see this.
By and large, I wasn't the least bit surprised by most of what is in the report, and having received it Sunday night, because Melissa obviously was working Sunday night, I tried to read through it, but I didn't get through all 200 pages. And to me, it was a microcosm of the greater Boston area, focused specifically on Braintree. And what I took out of it is the trend is Braintree is becoming more affordable only because every place else is more expensive. We used to be a place where people from the city neighborhoods would move here. Sure. We used to be a place where people from the city neighborhoods would move when they were doing better financially. Now, we're a place where people from the city neighborhoods are being forced to move to because they're being priced out of their own neighborhoods. And that's something that has people from the city coming into Braintree and overpaying for the houses because they're in bidding wars. And for longtime residents, you look at it and you say, I can't believe people are paying that kind of money for that house. but it's going on throughout the entire region, so it doesn't come as a surprise at all. What does come as a surprise is the information with respect to who's living in what houses, because most people that I speak to, they think of the housing stock in Braintree as being old and not big enough for what they need and what they want, despite the fact that the information that you have seems to suggest that an awful lot of people in Braintree are living in housing that's too big for what they really need, which is kind of surprising. And what it doesn't seem to take into consideration, which everybody who lives in Braintree and all other towns in this region can see by just driving around and seeing. We have generations of people living in single-family houses, sometimes 3 generations. They're being crammed in. They're living in the basements. They're doing all kinds of things that zoning enforcement officers would not want to take place. But it's taking place, and we can all see it. You see 6, 7 cars in front of a 1,500 square foot house. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. And I know it's not unique to Braintree, but it was surprising to hear that overall the numbers suggest the exact opposite, and that we've got a bunch of housing that's being underutilized. Some of the rest of it, I was pretty shocked to see that Braintree has a complete street program. There isn't a single bicycle path in this town, and I look at it as a situation where I go outside of Braintree to bicycle because I don't consider Braintree to be a bike safety town. And I ride my bike in Boston and feel safer than I do in Braintree, which is surprising. But bottom line is it's true. I also am not the least bit surprised about the accident data. And I think Joe's right. The people of Braintree has made the decision through their policymakers not to enforce traffic. I mean, it's out of control, and it's been out of control for a long time, but it seems like during the last 3 years or so, it's gotten worse. Some of it is maybe COVID related. Some of it is the redesign of the rotary. It's not working, and it's going to result in more accidents, not fewer accidents. We all know what's going on with the public buildings. We've actually made some progress, but we know we've got a lot of work to do. And frankly, I as a resident don't buy that we don't have enough money to address some of the problems that we have. We have, by our own speaking tonight, a very low tax rate. It's heavily subsidized by the business side of our tax base, and we choose to have a low tax rate. We want our low tax rate, so we've made our decision with respect to what we can afford and what we can't afford. And I can't tell you how many times in the past I've seen people say to me, I'm not going to vote for a Proposition 2.5 override. It's somebody with 3 kids in the school system and a $2,000 tax bill. Why they didn't want to spend more money on a Proposition 2.5 override when the town was providing 5 times the amount of tax revenue that they were providing to the town, to that family, it's hard to understand. But that's the decisions we've made. So, if we, as the process of coming up with a master plan, come up with maybe a new set of priorities, that's wonderful. I kind of look at it as a situation in which we are so far behind on infrastructure needs that as a town, we won't be able to do it on our own, and part of what we're going to have to do as far as a plan goes is to seek both state and federal help in addressing our infrastructure needs. And with respect to things like sustainability and that sort of thing, well, we're part of a big area that's got the same problems. It's nice that we are a town that's served by a municipal light department, which seems to be focusing more so than maybe a large for-profit electric company would be doing. But I think there's also room for additional sustainability. Overall, the only other thing I would like to point out is there are some areas where corrections will need to be made. So I'll just try to send those between now and the 11th. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Page.
Very much. I agree so much with almost everything that David Cunningham has just said. Thank you very much. Very well spoken. I went through the report, and I will have some comments and stuff, and the presentation, I agree with Erin, was different than reading the report, and I liked it. Thank you. One of the comments I would like to make tonight is the area where we discussed the median income in Braintree. And one of the things that I think we're overlooking there is the direct correlation that I would see with that and the aging population. Because you have people whose income is on a fixed income. And so, when you have a population that's made up of older people, you're probably not going to have a median income as a population that has a lot of people commuting into Boston for, high-paying jobs. I disagree with the theory that we need to build housing to bring people into work in Braintree. I think people make their own choices on where they want to live and work. There are lots of opportunities for different places for people to live if they want temporary if somebody doesn't want to own a home, there are certainly plenty of apartments in Braintree. So that's an option. And you have people that do own homes and do live in apartments that are commuting into Boston. I don't think we can force people to live in a particular place and work in a particular place. That's freedom of choice. And so I just don't agree with that theory. Let me see. Traffic is just a huge concern and cannot be stressed enough in the town. Speeding through the neighborhoods is a huge problem. And that all comes back to the Braintree split, the highway, people getting off to cut through as a cut-through town. And then we have Washington Street, the Washington Street corridor, and the Braintree squares. I feel like we're not really addressed the way that they should be in this report. Maybe it was and I missed it. I did my best to get through as much of it as I could. But I think Washington Street needs to be looked at to make these small businesses work better and try and create municipal parking lots that are more illuminated to people that are coming into Braintree to go out to eat and to go to different businesses. Maybe they could do parking lot sharings where it's a bank during the day and can service a restaurant at night. I think we need to look at some of those things because I think the squares really need to be revitalized, and I think that that's something that this needs to look at more. And another thing, when we were discussing the police calls, I would like to see that delved into more, and I would like to maybe see some type of a report that gives us maybe the 5 to 10 top type of calls that they're getting, whether it be to a large business that's drawing a lot of crime, as we stated. In the report, you noted that the Social Plaza is having a lot of issues with crime. So I would like to see a breakdown of what the top maybe 5 to 10 police calls are going to and in the town. And other than that, I think we all have our work cut out for us, and thank you very much.
I would like to say, I was surprised by the accident information. I guess not really, because I see the traffic in Braintree, but it's frightening because, like, we have a lot of us have new drivers on the road, so that's a little bit frightening. And it highlights to me that we talk about traffic. We sit here year after year and we talk about traffic. Town meetings, people scream about traffic, and here we are talking about traffic, and it doesn't get solved. And it's been 10 years of this traffic issue. It's dangerous. We're a cut-through town, and then we talk about adding to the town. And it's like, okay, well, you fix the traffic first. Fix the traffic. Fix the schools first. Give the police, a new headquarters, the fire, a new headquarters. Complete the infrastructure, and then we'll talk. So keep the promises that are coming, and I think that, we should address the infrastructure. When I read through the whole 200 pages, and I have 62 comments, and I won't bore you with all of them. I'm going to send you the document, because they're all, as sticky notes on the document digitally. So, but that is something that's, I think we have to address. And also, I agree with Liz on the salary. You can't help but, when you research your neighborhood, look at salaries and demographics, right? And when I first moved to Braintree, I noticed that some of my neighbors had that are not there anymore had low salaries. It's just because they were 80 and 90, and the income, I don't know if people report their investment income. And I also, to Dave's point, I am certain people don't report every person living in their house. I think we are understated there, and I think you could do a little drive-by and come up with a different number. I'm not arguing you have the data that you have, but I do think that's concerning. So I did want to say that I have several letters that have been submitted for consideration. The first one is from Jill Coyle, and I won't read through all of it, but the highlights of her report. She couldn't make it this evening. She was, as a past elected planning board member from 2000 to 2005, I remain involved in issues affecting the town of Braintree and its residents. During my tenure as planning board member and chair, we utilized the recommendations of the 1998 master plan to identify and guide our priorities. For this reason, I've been following the process of this committee, because the master plan is a roadmap for the town's future. And some of the reasons and areas for concern are the Phase 1 report exceeded the scope of the Phase 1 objective, which was to report existing conditions. And she goes on, and I'm going to give this to you. There was not enough community outreach to support the housing narrative and assumptions made through this document that will not occur until Phase 2. 3, the theme carried throughout the entire document were assumptions made by an outside impartial party contracted by the town to provide a final product based on facts, analysis, community input, etc. This premature theme suggests that the work being done is not being done impartially, but with a predetermined outcome. 4, I would strongly recommend that this document would be withdrawn and revised to reflect existing conditions without suggestions. 5, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I do not see any documentation on the committee's webpage pertaining to a very historic town event that occurred just over 3 years ago, March, the first public hearing for proposed comprehensive zoning that took place. Since this plan promoted 40R transit-oriented development and excessive density, the residents came out to vehemently oppose it and the urbanization of the town. So those are, she goes on because she's in planning experience to kind of correct. So I'm going to send that to you. I also have another letter which is on sort of the same idea from a resident and suggests to remove all future state recommendations, to remove speculative and unsupported conclusions, cite sources for all conclusions, or state that they are opinion of the report writer. 3, streamline and reorganize the report, and I'm going to send this to you. And 4, ensure that the supporting data is available for all the big questions. The Braintree split interchange was brought up at one of the master plan steering committees, I believe by Dave, but there did not seem to be any follow-up on that one. So I'll send you that. I also have, I'm sorry everyone, but I did get a number of letters. Another letter sort of along the same lines. The town has envisioned a suburban community. See the 1998 master plan for reminder and the estimated 800 residents that showed up at town hall to reject the comprehensive rezoning, most recently in 40B, inclusive of high-density development. High-density transition development is not what the residents of Braintree envision, and the Phase 1, God, sorry, my eyes, and the Phase 1 exit of the master plan will not be taken well by the community at large as documents. So I'll send that one off to you as well. And we have another letter from the community, but I think we're going to give the community a time. So if that's okay, Ellen, I won't. Okay. Okay, and that is what I have. So thank you. I'm sending these now. Okay. So, please.
Full comments. The one overwhelming theme that I think keeps on going through the town from being a resident here pretty much my whole life. So we have this vision of who we are, right? We're proud, we're hardworking, we help our neighbors. We want a beautiful community, we want beautiful town centers. We want to feel safe. We want to have great schools. We want to have pride in these areas. It's really hard having, I mean, you have 4 children. People around this table have kids in the schools. It's really difficult as a parent to go to different schools in different towns and see beautiful fields and brand new facilities. And, you know, it shows pride in the town, right? Everybody holds their heads up a little bit higher. People pick the litter up off the ground because it shows that it doesn't belong there, right? I feel like we talked about the infrastructure a lot, and we also, I don't know how this works. Where do we get the money from? You know what I mean? I know the school committee has been working, and there's a whole department on that, and we went through East, which looks gorgeous, and South is in its way, and hope to God that Braintree High is. But one of the things that elevates the town on the other end is the facilities we have in it. Like Archbishop Williams has a beautiful new field. Liz, they did a gorgeous job. Their academy looks gorgeous. So when people come through the town, they do see some beautiful attributes, but most of it doesn't come from the town. It comes from the different businesses or education facility, even Kat's Academy. So what I would love to see, we had that beautification plan, but Braintree really needs it, and we do. To your point, we need to figure out where we're going to get the money for it, because there's a lot of great ideas here, and I think people's heart are in the right place. I know the plaza for a long time subsidized a lot of our taxes. I don't know what that number is anymore. I'd love to see it because I don't have that information. Because that's not only an eyesore, but it's a place of a safety risk for the town, and it also. Unfortunately, at this point, I don't let my kids go there. It's just not some place that is a safe place. So, but that also is something in the community that we have to address. How are we accepting that, right? And what are we doing to fix that and change that? In the Union Street, we're trying to put a Band-Aid on it, but there's crashes after crashes. There's been 3 crashes at that road here with fires. I live right down the street from it in the last month. Really bad crashes. And that puts our fire people at risk. That puts our police at risk. And I know that there was a change made to try to make it better, but as we know, it's
it's not working. So so reading this report, I think there's a lot of great ideas. I thought there's great information. I too, Justine, really want to know, people are coming in and they're not paying $600,000 for houses. They're paying $800,000 for houses at this point. So who are we attracting? Who's buying those houses? Who's living in those houses? And what attracted us to them in the first place? Was it the low tax rates and the good school reputation and, some of the pretty parks? Or who are they, and how can we have more of those people, invest in Braintree, either with economic development or businesses or ideas or time or energy to kind of get us to where we want to be? Yeah.
Okay, is there anyone else?
Can I make one more comment?
A very quick one.
I know it was talked about the comprehensive zoning rewrite. There was a citizen review committee that reviewed that, and 90% of the comprehensive zoning rewrite they agreed with. So I hear a lot of people misrepresent why all these people came out back in 2019, that it was solely housing. It wasn't. There was a change that was going to be made to clean up every single zoning section that crossed. You had two different zonings and multiple properties in this town. The number one goal, first step, was to clean up that zoning because it caused a lot of problems. And the understanding of why every household in town had to be notified because they were within 300 feet of those zones that were being changed. There was a lot of misinformation that was set out that this was not what Braintree wanted, and there were not 800 people here. I stand by that. Thank you.
Okay. I think respectfully, we don't need to debate each other's statements, that we can all stand on our own merits and everybody has their own opinion, and that's great. And we want to be inclusive and give everyone the opportunity to state their own opinion without feeling threatened that somebody's going to change. Well, I don't mean threatened, but I just want to make sure that we are all feel comfortable sharing and not feel, I don't mean threatened, but I want everybody to, in the public who is coming here to speak, to feel comfortable doing so, and nobody will dispute your statements. So please come up to the podium and speak. Yes, Alan.
Name is Alan Flowers from Fallon Circle. I hope everybody can hear me.
We can.
But yeah, I was extremely upset when I first read this report because it wasn't what I understood originally. I thought it was going to be, just the in place, what's going on in our town, the statistics. And then I saw the policy conclusions. Your eye is normally drawn to the conclusions because, that's where the meat is. And now, after this presentation here, I don't see any of the policy conclusions. So I'm going from being upset to just confused, which I guess is an improvement, but not much. So I don't know what we should do about these policy recommendations or conclusions that you guys came to, but they're just totally inappropriate at this stage. I don't know where those were coming from, and should we just ignore them? Or should we address them one by one? What's going on? I don't know at this point. It was very poorly done and got people upset for no reason. So I don't know what the issues are there. I'm not going to go into each one then. If they're subject to change and they're not being used for everything, they were just somebody's opinion, as far as multifamily development and transit-oriented development and overhauling the zoning bylaw, we don't have to get into the details of that, but that's just, at this point, to make those suggestions, or it wasn't suggestion, it was conclusions, is just totally inappropriate. And then the area on sustainability, I think, is just totally inappropriate to have environmental justice in a master plan. I've never seen that before, and it's certainly not appropriate here. What should have been in sustainability is more about our water supply. I mean, there's nothing about how many times we had water restrictions in the last 10 years and, you know, how inadequate our water supply is. And it's just not even addressed. So at this point, and then there were a lot of other little things that I guess it's not appropriate to bring up at this time, but the confidence level is extremely low right now, at least from my standpoint. Thank you.
Please come on up.
Hi, my name is Megan Stellman. I lived in Braintree, except for the 3 years I lived in Quincy when I was born my whole life. And I own a home here. I went to Braintree Public Schools through grade 8, and then I went to a private high school. So first I wanted to say I was surprised that we didn't get an email about this meeting, because I was at the last forum meeting, and I only knew about this because my sister-in-law is on the committee. So I don't know if I missed an email or if we didn't get one, but I think people who came to the first one and wrote down their email addresses should have been told about this just as part of the process. Also, I would have loved to see the draft or the executive summary. I didn't see those online either. So the policies, well, it sounds like I might agree with them. I didn't get to read them. So something else, just more information is always better. You know, like love to hear, love to see. So, I mean, I know that if I bought a house now in Braintree, I wouldn't be able to afford it. You know, and I'm college educated, my husband is, we have good jobs, you know, it's just scary. So I think adding more housing will lower the rents, because right now people are paying like more than $2,000 for like a 2-bedroom apartment. That's ridiculous, right? And that's the region as well. It's not just Braintree, but if we want to be inclusive, if we want to keep people here, we need to make more opportunities for them to fit in here, right? And also, there's families, you said you have 4 children, other people do too. I mean, we don't have free full-day kindergarten, and obviously nothing is free through our taxes, whatever, but full-day kindergarten, you know, in aftercare, my husband and I, we paid $1,600 a month for our 4-year-old and our 6-year-old for school and childcare, and then we're paying our mortgage on top of that. And we're fortunate that we can, but it's not a very friendly town for that. Also, BASE, I've heard it's great, but it has a stranglehold on the aftercare program here. If your child is going to do after school, they have to go to BASE. They have to take a bus to BASE. Again, I've heard it's great, and we're going there next year, but I feel like there should be more options, like after school at the school, you know, so I can get one child at one school, one child, or eventually someday they'll be at the same school. I can get them at one spot instead of going everywhere. And then, speaking of schools, I'm surprised people are proud of them. You said people are proud of their schools. I'm proud of the teachers, absolutely. Nothing against them. But the facilities, as we've said, are terrible. They're old, outdated. I mean, Braintree High couldn't open on time this year because of electrical issues or water issues. The specialists are being cut left and right. I'm a school librarian. I could never work in Braintree, at least right now. Like, I will not get a job in Braintree. There's like 3 of them, right? So, you know, other towns are adding school librarians, but also just reading specialists, reading programs, math programs. Like, we need to invest in schools. And again, I know it's money. It's all money. It's not free money, you know, but it's important to a lot of us. And then lastly, the facilities in terms of recreation. I saw that Smith Beach was listed. Like, that was unswimmable last year. Like, my kids, I like brought our towels, our blanket, everything. There's a giant sign like, do not swim, you know? And then Sunset Lake as well. Like, when's the last time we could swim in Sunset Lake? Watson Park, you get covered in goose poop by the time you leave there. Like, my 4-year-old, she fell. She had goose poop all over her body. And that was not just like a random spot. So it's like, how can we make these places better and proud? Like, when my in-laws visit, I want them to see, like, this is our t-ball field. It's wonderful. Not like, oh, look out for that one and that one and that one and that one. You know, like, I mean, I love Braintree. My whole family's here. I love our neighborhood. My neighbors are wonderful. but I want to be able to keep being proud of it and not be, when people say, oh, Braintree's great, you can get anywhere from there. I'm like, yep, that's true. But that's not what we're proud of, right? Like, we have more than that. So thank you, and sorry to talk so long. I know there's a whole lot of people who want to talk. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please, come on up.
Hi. My name is Jane O'Brien. I have been a resident of Braintree for 39 years. We love Braintree. I'm actually speaking for my husband as well. He couldn't be here tonight. Neither of us are in favor of transit-oriented development. I'm also not in favor of a marijuana facility. I don't think that's the type of business we want to attract to Braintree. And I agree with the traffic issue. It's huge. Just crossing an intersection, we get halfway through and cars whiz by us and don't stop. So I agree with what Alan said too, about the report and how it's confusing, and that's about it. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Please, Gail.
Gail Ciccone, May Avenue. I'm a renter from my son. So I'm a new resident, eight or 9 years. I'm an older person. There's that combination. I'm also an educator. So the hats are on for all of the different things. But primarily it's about the revenue. And I'm hoping from this report and the work of the committee that we can come up with ways to use some of this. I don't know, I drive around, I see empty buildings, empty lots, empty empties, but in a very creative way, bringing in the jobs, bringing in families that can afford and have the reason to build affordable places. But I also, I live right off of Washington Street, which has come up. But the concern I have is when we're talking about small businesses and encouraging them, is where are they going to park? I've seen on the little strip where my Dunkin' Donuts is, I call it mine, there have been several businesses that have folded because there's no parking. You can't go in and buy an ice cream cone if you have to walk 5 miles to get a spot. And the other one around Southside Tavern, that is not Southside Tavern's municipal parking lot. Any of those businesses there on a Friday or Saturday, especially when there's sports on, you can't park in that parking lot. The one behind Dunkin' Donuts is used almost exclusively by Holland Construction. I go by there early in the morning and their trucks are parked there, not those people who want to use the businesses. So I think some of that zoning issues and parking to encourage small businesses, I'd love that, to have that. But we have to think big, because if this South Shore Plaza is going to implode for whatever reasons, safety and lack of clientele, we have to think of other bigger businesses. Little businesses are not going to support the things we need for our schools and the infrastructure and the major projects that we would look forward to having done. So I would like to see more on the revenue coming from experts as a guidance to us.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Please, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Cobblemere. I live at 30 Mount Vernon Avenue. I'm also a member of the Braintree School Committee. Very happy to see that the school infrastructure and buildings are included in the master plan. I think that's been an oversight in the town for many, many years, and I like to see that implemented in here and finding ways that we can develop innovative businesses in the town so that we can have those shiny buildings that, Shelley mentioned, that we go to other towns and we see all these great brand new schools. And while we have pride in our schools, I think, speaking from a parent that has, 2 kids in the system, that I think morale and having a nice sense of having a nice building and a place to go to school, a safe, state-of-the-art, where you can actually have learning is a very important thing. So I think that's great. Another thing that I'd like to bring up that I didn't find surprising in the data, and I appreciate all the work that went into it, I think it's really great to get that snapshot, is that we have a very diverse what was the exact words here? I wrote it down somewhere here. The population is more racially and ethnically diverse. And I think that's something that also the schools see that, and I think it would be a great opportunity to have some kind of a DEI or civil rights committee that could be part of the master plan where we discuss those kind of issues where new people are coming into the community and we're not aware of some of the cultural things that they bring to Braintree, which makes it such a vibrant community. And I think that's very important too, and it's something that we've talked about in the schools, but my feeling from administration is it should be driven by the town, that the schools should not be creating something like this, even though most of these things happen in the schools, that it should be embraced by people in the community, and that we should be welcoming of different cultures. And I think that's really important, and some kind of a subcommittee I think would be great. We just recently had a pride flag raising, and I think that's great, and thank you to Town Council Maglio for doing that. And I think things like that are really important, and the fact that we have different cultures, and I think if we could do something like that would be very helpful to the community. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay. So we need a motion. Oh, please. Yes, you're right. Okay. Yes, please. Phase 2. Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, and thank you all for all of your comments. Really important to hear everything that you're saying. I think all of us took extensive notes on all of that, and you're definitely heard, and we'll be taking that into account. So we can start talking about launching Phase 2. So the purpose of Phase 2 is to create a community vision, an aspirational community vision, and goals that will set to achieve that vision through meaningful and inclusive community engagement. Community engagement is really the highlight of this phase, and it'll be a major focus, and we need your help. And this is a quote, dream a little before you think. Before we start getting down into the actual strategies and recommendations that we'll be making, we want to dream about what you envision for the future before we get down into that. An important part of our engagement for this summer is to, go where the people are. We had a really great turnout at our community forum, but we can't expect to hear from everybody if we just ask them to all come to us. We need to go out into the community, make it easy for people to engage with us, talk with us, and give us their opinions. We use a ton of different ways to engage with people. We engage with those who want in-depth conversations, those who want privacy through an online survey, and those who want a quick way to share their thoughts, maybe at an event, just something they can scribble down and give their opinions. So one of the first ways that we have is something that we've talked about before, is this meeting in a box. And what this is we'll give you a packet that basically gives you a script of what to say to people in your meeting. So you can invite a few neighbors over for coffee, get a book group together, have some people meet at a cafe, and you'll host this meeting, but we'll give you all of the details that you need. And we'll get information about what people envision for the future, what they think about the different elements of the master plan, and really just thinking forward, what are some of the key places that they love about Braintree. A lot of just different questions that we have for people that will help us form this community vision. That is the key point of phase 2. So after you would host your meeting in a box, you would send us your notes, and this will be kind of like maybe like a pyramid scheme of meetings. You would ask everyone that attended your meeting to host their own meeting, and that way we can reach more and more people in the community through these meetings in a box. And this is a little bit of what the meeting in a box will look like. We are finalizing the actual packet, and these materials will be ready sometime next week. But this is a glimpse of what this will look like. Just very detailed instructions, and this part, read this aloud. It tells you exactly what you need to say, so don't worry about not knowing how to run this or what you might need to prepare or anything. It's all there for you. We make it as easy as possible. So we, as part of the next steps for the meeting of the box, we'd love it if all of the master plan committee members would host one of these, maybe before our next meeting, which is July 28th. And we'll post the meeting in a box packet on the project website, so that it's easily accessible, and so that you can share that link for people to host their own meetings. And we would like to have all of the summaries for that by September 2nd. So you have a lot of time this summer to host these and encourage your friends and family to host them as well. Another piece of engagement is the community survey. So this is just some screenshots of what it looks like. We use SurveyMonkey to have the online version that people can take on their computer, on their phone. I think Melissa mentioned having a flyer at the tabling events with a QR code where people can just scan that and then take the quiz right there, make it super easy. We can also provide a paper version if that's easier for people to, that you can just print out and have people take it on paper and then have someone record it online. And that's a really great way to get information from people. So the survey will be ready tomorrow for Braintree Day, and we'll provide those flyers and everything so we can get that started right away. And the survey will be live through September 6th. So this is something that we really want to push, tell everyone in Braintree to take the survey, and that would be really helpful for just making sure that we're hearing from everybody and getting enough community engagement. So there are some events going on this summer. If you think of any more that you want to attend, these are just like Farmers Market, Braintree Day, summer concerts, anything else that you hear of going on around town would be a great opportunity to share about the master plan, get people to take the survey. At these events, we'll also provide some fun activities and informational materials that can be there. So we have some boards that we've prepared of just some information about what is the master plan and telling people how they can be involved, and some of the preliminary findings from the existing conditions report. We'll have some activities asking people, what is your vision, a Post-it note exercise that I'm sure you're all familiar with at this point, our Post-it notes. A daily news type of activity where we'll have a blank newspaper with a headline. For 10 years from now, just talking about the success of Braintree, where it has gone in the 10 years. What is the newspaper headline that you envision for that date 10 years from now? What have you accomplished in that time? What are you proud of? And then another activity for just what are 3 things you love about Braintree. This is one that's, a quick way that people, if they're like, I don't really want to spend a lot of time thinking about something, they can jot down a few things, and that is still really helpful for our part of the process. We also will have a crowd mapping tool. So this is a tool online that will be on the the project website where people can look through an interactive map and place ideas for different, potential ideas or concerns that they have, and that will be available to view by other community members. People can vote on ideas, say, hey, I like that idea, and it's a really great interactive tool for that. So that would be asking questions about like, what do you envision, so that people can achieve what different categories that we've provided for all of the different ideas, and there should be a way to add a photo if that's something that they want to do. There's also going to be comments and upvoting, and we will manage the comments to make sure no one is being inappropriate in them. And then finally, we have the community forum, which will be in October, October 15th, another Saturday. And this is where we'll share some findings from the summer engagement, but also through that engagement, you might have noticed we're closing all of the engagement in early September. We're going to take the time from when we close that until the forum to develop a draft community vision and those goals. And this is where we'll get some feedback from the community about those, so that we can take those, adjust them based on what we hear, and then move forward into phase 3 with all of that community engagement. All right, thank you. Do you guys have any questions about any of that I just presented? Yeah.
It was after you talked about the meetings in the box. It was like things you love about Braintree. And I was wondering if it would be possible for there to be like something very kid-friendly as a handout I don't know if that's already in your plans, but something that could encourage anyone from elementary to high school students to provide feedback.
Yeah, so the one activity that we mentioned for the tabling events, like what are 3 things you love about Braintree, that'll be like a blank paper with just that prompt up there, and the ideas that we'll provide, like pens if adults want to like write down 3 things, but a kid could like draw with like crayons, markers, and say like, this is what I love through drawings, or they can participate in that really easily. It's a really accessible way for kids to get involved there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
You were saying there'll be a link tomorrow, or there'll be, yeah.
At the events and at Braintree Day, there'll be a link and a QR code on that flyer. It'll also be posted on the website. We'll have a link to it in the meeting in a box packet. That's like one of the best ways that we get information, so we want like everyone to take that survey.
Got it. And then when you pulled up the document and it said, Braintree 2033, which I love, but it just kind of triggered something in my mind that I was on a South Shore, it was I can't even think about the name of it right now, but it was a big event that I was part of. But the South Shore 2030 is a working document. So obviously Braintree's micro, like we're thinking about micro, but there's a lot of plans that the state have on regional areas, and one of them is transportation, another one's sustainability, and it just kind of, when I saw that, I said, oh my gosh, that triggered that in my head. So when we're making this master plan, obviously we're spinning our wheels and we're putting these ideas down, we're going to be looking at, the state might already have some of those plans, right? Or there might be things that we're can't even do due to transportation because the 2030 plan already supersedes that, and those were already written in. Is that something that you guys are already made aware of? Because I know that is a working document.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
It's a good question. How do you ensure consistency? And,
Yeah.
Braintree is not required to follow a regional plan, of course. You can go kind of off on your own if in certain areas, if that's what's called for.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's important to highlight, well, what are those regional plans, and do people
Well, some
even
of them are already in
understand
motion.
them?
Like Plymouth,
Yeah.
I know the Plymouth-Brockton bus line coming into Braintree. I know there's a couple of...
And how will things affect Braintree? That's a
Mhm.
good point, yeah.
Yeah, I
And-
mean, it's a public document, but it's definitely in process. It's in year
Mhm.
3. I know some of it got backtracked because of COVID, but
Yeah.
a lot of the banks are already behind it. The development's behind it. You can see it all over
Yeah, it's a
Weymouth.
good point. We should integrate that, I think,
Yeah.
into the existing conditions
Yeah,
report.
Peter
a
Foreman,
little bit
I mean,
more.
he's over,
Yeah.
he does a lot of that, but,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have.
More, how would I say, the resident friendly. Like example of not for younger people, but for me, I always look at myself stupid audience. For me, just looking at some picture or something quick that I could understand, which instead of 20 pages or 5 pages of documentation have residents to read through. If you could do something more simplified.
Yeah, let me explain it. I know you don't have the actual meeting in a box yet in front of you. We'll have it ready next week, but it's basically a series of worksheets, and so it gives you a little script at the top that's like a few sentences for each section. And so you basically like turn to the first page, and it will give you a short script to read. And then it's a big blank page, and someone just needs to take notes. It could be yourself, or it could be another member of your meeting if you invite some neighbors over. And then you just chat about the few sentences you read, and you chat to each other and kind of record the conversation in your notes. And then we give suggested time frames, so like spend 15 minutes on this question. And so it's helpful if you keep a little bit of track, because the meeting could run on longer than you wanted to if you don't kind of move through things, but that's up to you. And then when you're finished with that question, you go to the next page, and there's like 2 or 3 sentences to read, and then you have another discussion about that. So it's pretty, I think it's pretty straightforward, but when you see it, let us know if you have any questions on that, or if you need any more clarification.
Okay, let's do. Quick question about the survey. We talk about diversity. Is there any plan to translate in multi-language?
I'm so glad you asked. We were just talking about that today. Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully the meeting in the box too, we can get both of those translated. And I just wanted to mention for the group that we'll do a press release on the survey, get that out there so everybody knows that it's on the website and they can do it whenever they want at home at their own leisure. Sometimes it is tough for people to come out and get to meetings. So I think it's really important to capture those individuals that aren't coming to us through that survey. So I'll coordinate with the mayor's office on a press release.
Jennifer, I think Julia wants to speak.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Is there a way on the survey, because to determine who is a Braintree resident? Because Braintree Day is we draw in lots of people from other communities, and certainly the internet is not Braintree specific.
We ask them if they're a resident, but it is the honor system. We don't have a way of,
If I may, through the chair, to Councilor Flaherty's question. So my plan was to, hey, do you live in Braintree? Kind of try to interact with people and get them excited about it. We'll have the board, where do you live in Braintree? And we also, if we had to, again, because we're going to be giving some prizes, we will be verifying. We have the resident books, so we can verify that people are, in fact, a resident. I mean, I would think that people don't want to take a survey about another town, but you never really know. But we really want to try to, even questions like, hey, what part of town do you live in? Do you live in North Braintree? Do you live in the Highlands? Do you live over in East Braintree? To really try to get a vibe going and have discussions with people so they can get excited versus like, hey, do our survey. So that's sort of the plan. I'm going to sort of bring the Melissa excitement to the day.
I think that will work on
And hopefully get some fried dough. I heard they had fried dough.
I think that will work on Braintree Day, but online, do you have at least a box for them to check whether they're a Braintree resident or not?
We ask them if they're a Braintree resident or own a business or own property, or have another affiliation or have family in the town. We have I think, is it the first question? It's one of the very first questions, and then we can filter their responses. So if you're a business owner, we can see, well, did you answer any of the questions differently than if you say you're a property owner or,
Could they provide an address? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, Are
you done?
Thank you.
Okay. Could they provide an address for verification?
I mean, we could ask for an address if you'd like. We usually make it anonymous, but I don't see a reason, I guess, why we couldn't provide that, or ask for that. Yeah, we do already ask for a neighborhood in there. Yeah, we have a series of questions about who they are, and so it's what neighborhood do you live in, and we have to agree on what the neighborhood names are. Sometimes people are like, well, what about this, sub-neighborhood? So we want to just make sure we get that right. But we typically have what neighborhood do you live in, and then if you don't know, you can provide your street name, we usually say, or, if it's a long street, that's a little harder, but.
Yes.
That we try not to have Braintree residents provide input into the process.
Try not to have them?
This discussion seems to be focusing on making sure that it's a Braintree resident who participates in the survey. And I'm thinking to myself saying, why is that important? I mean, people who show up at the celebration that's going to be this Saturday, let's face it, they're probably no more than 20 miles away. And it might actually be very helpful to have input from someone who doesn't live in the town to provide their impression of the town. Maybe we are completely with blinders on if we go about the process and limit it to only Braintree residents. If somebody from Weymouth decides to go to Braintree Day, they probably are very familiar with what's going on in Braintree and can provide some great input. And I'm sure the same is true with people who live in almost any town within 10 miles of where we live. They can compare, for instance, oh yeah, I live in Weymouth. Yeah, we've got brand new schools. We've got, streets that have painting for bicycles. We've got this, we've got that. Or, I live in Quincy. This is what we've got. I don't know what Braintree's thinking about. Something like, what people from other towns can offer that people in Braintree might not even have thought of. I see no detriment to having the survey be done by people who don't live in Braintree.
What their affiliation, and they could say other, they can answer, I live in Weymouth and I happen to come to, so I think that we may get some people who don't live here through the survey, yeah. And we can filter the answers by what they.
It'd be interesting to see the difference, right? As a point of comparison.
And we also, just so you know, we ask other demographic questions like what is your age? We have, we can filter by, well, what do older residents say or what do younger people say? And we also ask, if you rent or own in Braintree and filter that way as well. So it's sometimes can provide some interesting differences in responses by finding some of that out and then being able to filter what they're, what people are answering based on some of those demographic characteristics.
Does anyone else have any questions? Comments? Okay. Okay, would you like to?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the April 28th meeting.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, motion approved.
I will also make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye, all right, motion approved. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.